In this lesson, we'll work on adding some additional detail components to our main engine. Okay, so now that we have our thrusters built up, what I'd like to do is add some sort of tubes onto the side of this, sort of similar to what you would see on maybe an older plane or maybe even a hot rod, connecting some of the different engine pieces together. So let's come in and try to build this up. We'll use a very similar method or a technique to what we did with the wing connections as well as this little pilot lip here. So let's start by making ourselves a curve that we can actually extrude another shape along. So let's go to Primitive, Curve, and this time we're going to use an arc, which is not something that we have used before. Now an arc is really just like the name suggests. It allows us to come in here and have basically this very, very simple arc where we can control things like the end, the start, and lots of other options as well. So let's come in here and start to drop this number of subdivisions down. Again, I find that's a little bit easier to work with if we can start to minimize just how many subdivisions we actually need. So in my case, I'll try maybe something like 4 or 5. And as far as the actual start and end angle, I might actually come in here and give this start and end of maybe something a little bit higher. Maybe something like 230 or 240. So that should work for what we need. Now I'll go ahead and tap my spacebar to go back to object mode. Let's rotate this around. And in my previous lesson, I had turned on my X-ray on accident, so let's go ahead and turn that back off. We'll pull this back in. And essentially, we'll start to scale this down. And really what I'd like to do is use this arc as the shape for my actual pipe or my tube here. So I'll select this, press the F key on my keyboard. Now if you recall, at any point in time I can still get back to the actual parameters of this arc. So if I select this and press the Enter key on my keyboard, I should be able to still come in here and adjust things like the actual start and the end angle. So if I were to maybe dial that up a little bit higher, let's rotate this back around and now start to increase that start radius. Essentially, I'm just trying to get this to where it connects in really with these two pieces of the engine. So just sort of eyeballing this and trying to get this into place. Okay, now let's come in and start to make some minor adjustments as far as the overall shape of this. So if we were to come in and grab maybe some of these different components, again, just press the T key on my keyboard. We can come in and grab some of these and start to shape this around. Now the problem becomes that whenever we start to grab some of these individual points, it starts to become really, really easy to begin losing my shape. So it becomes sometimes really, really tedious to come in here and grab a whole bunch of these different points and start to grab these and kind of shuffle these around one by one. Now if I undo this a few steps, Softimage actually has a feature called proportional modeling. This is actually really, really useful. Now this is found right next to the COG button. This is called proportional modeling. Now if I turn this on and now tag a point, at the moment it really doesn't look like much has happened. But what we can actually do is whenever we select a point or really any component on our surface, we can actually set some kind of a fall-off radius to where it actually starts to affect other components as well. So to access this, again, if you notice, this proportional modeling button has this little tick icon up in the upper corner, which means that there is some additional options found for this. So if I right-click on this proportional modeling button, we can now come in and start to set the actual distance. So if I start to increase this, you can start to see now where my color of these points start to change. Whereas before, you can start to see where they were all blue. Now we can begin seeing as I start to increase this, they start to change color with this distance. So really that's just showing the amount of influence that we have. So as we start to dial that up or down, you can start to see these have quite a bit of influence on them. As we start to dial that down to where they begin falling more into black and then finally back to their default blue, these areas won't have any sort of effect applied to them. Now sometimes I find that it is a little bit tricky to come in here and try to actually adjust this fall-off distance and get it looking just right. So what we can actually do is use the middle mouse wheel to actually control this. Now, unfortunately, as we start to adjust this middle mouse wheel, it also is controlling our camera movement. So if you want, we could come into our preferences, disable that feature. So if we go into our tools, back to the camera, we should be able to set our mouse wheel to be used for navigation only. Now with that option turned on, what I should be able to do is now just roll my mouse wheel, and you can see as I roll that, it is automatically changing the distance of my proportional modeling. Now the thing to keep in mind with proportional modeling, and this is something that's very, very important, the proportional modeling will only have some kind of an effect if you have something like your translate, scale, or rotate tools active. If I were to simply press the T key on my keyboard to just tag these points, you notice we have no proportional modeling effect. Okay, so proportional modeling is enabled. To actually use that, I'll activate something like the translate tool. There we go. And now I can use my middle mouse wheel to come in and start to pull these back. You can see now with this little bit of influence, it now becomes much easier to maintain my smooth lines and things like that. So really this proportional modeling tool, you'll find that this is very, very useful for lots and lots of purposes. So coming in and moving some of those points around. So we'll start with something like that for our main shape. Maybe come in here, tag some of those points, and pull these forward a little bit. I'd like to have a nice little bit of curvature to this. So now let's go ahead and test this out. So let's make ourselves a new circle. There we are. We'll set the number of subdivisions on that, again, down to something like 8, just to keep things nice and small here. And we'll bring that radius down quite a bit. So in my case, I've set that to something like 0.5. I can just move this a little bit closer so it's a little bit easier to see. Now with this new circle selected, we'll go to Create Surface Mesh, and we'll create a new surface by extruding along a curve. Now we can select the curve that we want to use, and there we go. At this point, we can start to increase the number of divisions, either horizontally or vertically. I might go ahead and set mine to something like 2, just so that way I have a few more points in here to be able to work with, and also to be able to hold that detail a little bit better. Now overall, this looks like that's actually going to be a pretty good fit. Now again, because this is still being controlled by the initial curve, we could still grab that curve and start to manipulate it if we want to reshape this. Now just to make this curve easier to grab, I'm going to go ahead and turn on my X-ray mode, so that way I can actually grab that curve that's inside the geometry. Again, press the T key on my keyboard, maybe tag some of these points, and again with my proportional modeling tool active, come in and start to reshape some of these. Here we are. So again, just playing around with the shape until I find something that is going to work for me. Once I'm finished, just tap my space bar, and we are finished. So let's go ahead and just take a quick look at this. We can continue duplicating this. So with this selected, I'm going to go ahead and press the COG button to go ahead and set my manipulator back. Let's go ahead and press Ctrl D to duplicate this. We'll move this set of pipes forward a little bit. Ctrl D to duplicate one more time. So that way we have 3 of these little pipes in here. So that should work just fine for me. Now I'd like to also have these pipes on the other side of my engine as well. So just select these 3 pipes. Let's go up to Edit, Duplicate Instantiate, and down toward the bottom, Duplicate Symmetry. Just like before, we're going to flip this along the YZ plane, so it moves along the X-axis. Go ahead and press OK. And if these guys turn inside out, that's perfectly normal. With those selected, just go back to Surface Mesh, and then invert normals. Okay, very nice. So here's our different sets of pipes. And again, at any point in time, because these are all connected to this exact same curve, we could always come back, maybe tag some of these points, and if we wanted to move those across from each other or move those away, we could still come in, and by adjusting this one curve, you can see how it affects all the different pipes that were built from that curve. So we can still come in with a high degree of control and start to reshape and make some pretty significant adjustments to these pipes. Now again, when you're finished with the proportional modeling, you want to make sure that you turn that off. And now I can come in and maybe add a little bit more of a sharp corner to that. Again, that's just my personal look that I'm trying to go for here. Okay, very nice. So now you can see we have our little pipes underneath the engine compartment. Now, once we're finished with everything, again, it's a good idea to come in and just freeze all of our operators. So I'll just select everything just to make sure that I do have everything selected. Freeze those operators. And now that frees me up to be able to come in here. And if I turn off my 3D geometry, we can now safely remove those curves. Okay, so that is a look at how we can start to use things like our proportional modeling to really help us out when it comes to manipulating points and vertices, as well as edges and polygons.